Welcome to Living the Empowered Life podcast, where we discuss all things empowering, encouraging and inspiring. My name is Yvonne Ellis. I'm an empowerment speaker, author, coach, trainer and founder of Yumi Empowerment, a company that facilitates the empowerment of people. I help people to make positive life change, live in their purpose and develop into their best version of self. I share stories, interviews, spiritual encouragement and actionable tips to empower, encourage and inspire you to live the life you want. So if you want to live the empowered life, join me each week on my podcast so we can take the journey together. Hello Empowered Lifers, welcome to episode 67 of Living the Empowered Life podcast. Hope you're all doing well. I'm doing great, enjoying this lovely sunny weather, even though at times my hay fever's been playing up. As you guys know, I've been complaining about my hay fever for a little while now, but I've been out and about enjoying the weather, having my little coffee breaks, going out and about when I can in between work and study. At the moment, I am on my last part of my master's degree. It's getting to the hard stage now. It's the dissertation stage, which I'm learning all about. At the moment, I am deciding what research topic I'm going to do my last piece of work, which is a 10,000 word research essay about. And I've kind of decided actually what I want to do it about. And I'm preparing to, start that in the next couple of weeks. I should be finished by September. In other news, I am going out and about again next week to go and get my book into other bookshops, which I'm looking forward to. I have been really busy with work, so I haven't really been able to do anything on the marketing and promoting of my book, my latest book, Exceptional Not Expected. But, as I said before, I have to try and push these things in. But not really much has been going on for me, just working, keeping focused and studying. This is what the rest of my year is going to look like for me at the moment. I can't really take on anything else. And I just need to get past this last little bit. But I hope whatever you're doing in your life is going really well. I hope that you're focusing on your goals and your dreams and the things that you have decided that you want to do in your life. And if it's your first time listening into this podcast, I welcome you. I hope that you find this episode to be something of value to you and to my continued listeners and supporters. You guys know already, I love you. Thank you for your encouragement and support. Please continue to share these episodes with anybody that you know, friends, acquaintances, neighbours, colleagues, whoever you feel needs a dose of living the empowered life. And don't forget to subscribe or follow this podcast so you don't miss the bi-weekly episodes on Apple Podcasts, Spotify or Stitcher. Don't forget to do that, guys, because you don't want to miss any of the episodes that are, that will be coming up. So today, in this episode, I'm going to give you advice about advice. And I think this is something that is really important because sometimes we can go through life taking advice and not really thinking about who the source of the advice is or where it's coming from. We need to get kind of a discernment about advice and whether we should take it or not. And I have plenty of experience in this area of advice and working out what advice is good for my life and what advice is not. And I want to share some of the things with you that I've learned from that in this episode. But before I do that, I want to share with you some quotes about advice. The first one is, advice is like snow. The softer it falls, the longer it is dwelled upon, and the deeper it sinks into the mind. I suppose what that person's trying to say there, well, Samuel Taylor Coleridge is trying to say there, is that it's about reflecting on advice. I don't know if you got that from that quote, but yeah, that's what I got from it. The second quote is by Robert T. Kiyosaki. I think that's how you say his name. He says, "Be careful who you get advice from. I get advice from people who are where I want to be." So true. That's one of the things I'm going to touch upon in this episode about sources of advice. And another quote here says from Alexis Carrel, "All of us at certain moments of our lives need to take advice and to receive help from other people." So true. That is very, very true. And the last quote I want to share with you is by coolfunnyquotes.com. And it says, "My advice is to never listen to any advice, not even this one." That's a bit of a funny quote. So that is just some quotes about advice. And I have been meaning to do this episode since last August. Yeah, August 2022. And that is when I listened to Will Smith's autobiography called Will. I listen to some books on Audible. I like reading books, but I love to listen to some books as well on Audible when I'm on my coffee cake days or things like that. But I wanted to do this podcast from back then in August because there was something that stood out to me in one of the chapters from listening to his book. So, just a little bit of a background about it. I bought this book because I like, as I said, listening to books and reading books. And I like to especially listen to books or read books about other people's stories. I like to kind of listen or read about where they've journeyed from to living the life that they're living today. The backstory is always, I find, more interesting than the story of where they are, where they're at today, because it obviously shows like a journey and different things, character development, resilience, all that stuff to how they've got to where they are today. So that is why I bought his book. I buy books of people's different life stories from all different backgrounds. And, I really believe that living the empowered life is all about different experiences. And, that leads to living an empowered life. And Will's book definitely did display that. Now, it is an interesting book. And even though I did come away from it seeing another side to Will Smith's character that is very different to the side that he shows in the media, that is something for a different podcast. If I was going to do a book review on that, that's what I would share a bit more about that. But what I wanted to focus on really is about the realization he had about advice. I'll give you a little bit of a background of the story. In his teens, his mother wanted him to go to college, wanted him to, once he finished school, to go to college. Will had other ideas. He wanted to get into music. He wanted to get into music and going on the road with his friend Jeff, who's known as Jazzy Jeff. And, just really getting into the music industry. He wanted to be a rapper. And they were very good at it. They were making money from it. They were getting booked for shows and different things like that. But his mum wanted him to finish college. And she made that very clear to him throughout the whole of his teenage years. There was ultimatums, there were threats, there was demands, all this stuff ensued. And it was during this whole back and forth, as I said, that started from his mid to late teens, that he had a revelation of advice. Because at that point, his mum was telling him, I'm advising you, or I'm actually telling you, you need to go to college. And it was at that point he decided, I'm not going to take my mother's advice. So I really wanted to share with you the audio of that little snippet of the audio book where Will talks about the what he learned about advice. But because of copyright and everything else, I wasn't sure how it worked on podcasts. I decided not to do that. So for you guys, and only for you guys, I decided to quickly write it up in my notebook so that I could share it with you. So I'm just going to share what Will said about advice. He says, the thing I've learned over the years about advice is that no one can accurately predict the future, while we all think we can. So advice at its best is one person's limited perspective of the infinite possibilities before you. People's advice is based on their own experiences, their own prejudices, and at the end of the day, their advice is just that. It's theirs, not yours. When people give you advice, they are basing it on what they would do, what they perceive, and what they think you can do. But the bottom line is, while yes, it is true that we are all subject to a series of universal laws, patterns, tides, and currents, all of which are somewhat predictable, you are the first time you've ever happened. You are now a unique occurrence of which you are the most reliable measure of all possibilities. When I heard Will Smith's take on advice back last August, it was really one of those things that really stood out to me, because everybody has their own life. This is very true. And everybody's own experiences, own kind of journeys will then influence how they give advice. And I wanted to talk to you about this in this episode because to live an empowered life, a lot of the time it requires you to do things outside of what other people are doing. And I had to think about that in terms of then how does other people's advice really relate into my life? Because as I shared in that quote by Alexis Carroll, all of us at certain moments of our lives do need advice and do need help from other people. But how do we all find the balance? Now, I'm sure from Mama Will Smith's point of view, she was given this advice with the right intentions. And it is true, there are people out here, we've all had them in our lives, I'm sure you've had them, I've had them in my life, where they try and give advice with the right intentions. But unfortunately, that advice is not for that person. So, they might be giving me advice, but it's not actually for me. Just like that example that I gave about Will Smith's mother giving him advice and him coming to the conclusion that that advice was not for him. Unintentionally, bad advice usually comes from people that have not done what you are attempting to do. It usually comes from fear, it comes from doubt, it comes from worry. And a lot of the time, unfortunately, bad advice, or unintentional bad advice, I should say, comes from people who are living in their comfort zone. They're kind of what people would call armchair counselors. They give advice from the comfort of their armchair and tell you what they feel that you should and shouldn't do. Also as well, people that have no knowledge, experience or understanding of your challenge or issue will offer advice just because. This is not going to, in my opinion, lead to a good outcome. Now, one of the things I've kind of picked up and learned about advice over the years is that discernment is needed when taking advice from other people. Because the question is, what out of it, and this is the question you should be asking yourself when you're taking advice from somebody, is what out of it can I apply or is relevant to my situation or my life? And for me, this is where prayer comes in, because God is wisdom, and in God, He leads us to all truth. Also as well, there is a danger in advice. And I'm going to explain to you what I mean by that. It is that, if you are always seeking advice from others, you leave yourself in a position that you possibly don't want to see yourself in, where you allow people possibly to manipulate or control you. And this is something that had happened to me from like my early teens in some circumstances to my mid 20s, because I, had, as I've explained on other podcast episodes, at times low self-esteem and low confidence in myself. I didn't really feel confident enough in my decisions, and I used to, be seeking advice from others a lot of the time. And the reason why I always asked people's opinions or sought their advice is because I didn't trust myself. That is what I kind of reflected on about that time in my life, is that I didn't trust myself to make the right decisions regarding my life. And that, as I said, left me open to the influence and control of others, because that is ultimately what you're doing when you're allowing others to give you advice and give you opinions about things. You are allowing them to have power in your life. And I've learned along the way, and since those early experiences of my teens and, early 20s, that only God should have that much power and influence in your life. I've had to learn the hard way that sometimes people will give you advice not because they want to see you win, but to derail you. Let that sink in for a moment. But it's so true that there is people out there that will give you deliberately bad advice because they don't want to see you succeed in the thing that you do. And I'm telling you this because I've experienced it in my life. And in order to avoid this again feeds into how to discern where to take advice from and who to take it from. You have to think about, is this person always being a positive support to you? As well as, not only that, but as well as, have they got experience, knowledge, wisdom, or insight? In Will Smith's situation, one would assume that mama knows best because, well, it's mama. But in this case, Will knew he had a passion for a purpose he believed he was born to do. So if you are looking for advice, it is not to discover what you should do, but to empower you to do the things you are trying to do. So again, to get advice is not to discover you. It is to empower you to do the things you are trying to do. Now, we've all been there before when we have got bad advice from people. Well, I'm just assuming actually that you've been there before, but I've been there before, and I've had plenty of situations where I have been given deliberately bad advice, and also, people just offering bad advice in general. Now, when people offer you bad advice, you should handle it with grace. This is something that my husband taught me how to do. When people offer you advice, just simply say, okay, yeah, I'll think about it. Obviously knowing all the while that you're not going to really think about it, you've discarded it already, and simply say thank you. And it costs nothing to do that, to them. It feels like an appreciation because they've given you this advice, not knowing that, you're not going to take it because it's bad advice. But simply just saying, I'll think about it, thank you. It's a very easy way to kind of get rid of bad advice. Now, good advice comes from, and these are things I know from experience because I've had people in my life that have given me good advice, usually people who have discernment, people who've had knowledge and experience of certain things, who have given me advice. And good advice comes from people with wisdom, people with knowledge, people with experience, people with insight. You might not have had exactly the 100% same circumstances or challenges, but say, for example, somebody has stepped out and left their job. They might have set up their own business, but just stepped out and just left their job. They have experience of doing that. They might not be stepping out to start their own business or doing something like that, but they have experience of stepping out of something. Therefore, I believe their advice is valid. And in good advice, as I shared about wisdom, knowledge, experience, and insight, look for these elements in advice in general. That is given to you because this is a good indicator that the advice might possibly benefit you. And also, I just want to share with you some other things about advice for you to think about. Advice is not generic, it is specific to you from someone or a source with that knowledge. So when somebody is given a general piece of advice and it's not tailored to anyone or anything, that advice is definitely not for you. Also, as well, advice is from experience. I will use myself as an example here. I can talk to you about living the empowered life because I'm living it. I went through the hardship, the sacrifice, and the hard work to live it. I've wrote books about it. My book, Into the Unknown, my 4th book, I talk and detail that journey for anybody reading it about how I went through the unknown of different situations with courage and faith. So I have knowledge, experience, insight, and wisdom learned from those experiences that have helped me to live an empowered life. So you can trust my advice. You can trust my advice because not only am I living it, I've also shared with you and documented steps on how you can live it. Track record and results are important. When you look to someone for advice, the question also as well you need to ask yourself is, what are their fruits? In other words, what is the results of the advice they are giving you in their own life? This is always a good indicator as well. When you're looking for advice, look at the person and their life. Does this person look like they've been taking their own advice? You need to look at those things. And also as well, advice from whoever you get it from should help you to move forward and not shrink back. This is really important when you're trying to live the empowered life or trying to do things with courage or trying to do new and different things. Whoever you're getting advice from should be facilitating and empowering you to take the next step of that thing. They shouldn't be like telling you to shrink back or telling you you're stupid, you're crazy. No one else has never done it before. That means you're not going to be successful. All that type of stuff. If somebody's telling you that, that is kind of fruits of someone with bad advice, that is giving bad advice. So always think about that when you're looking for someone to give you advice. Is it helping me to move forward, or is it going to shrink me back? So the Bible scripture I want to share with you in this episode comes from Proverbs 3 verse 5 to 6. And I think I've shared it before. in earlier podcasts, but for me, it's one of the ones that have helped me in my journey of getting advice. And that is to trust in the Lord with all your heart and do not lean on your own understanding. In all your ways, acknowledge him and he will make your path straight. There is no one better to go to than the living God to get advice. Just like I've always said on this podcast, you can talk to the Lord God like you talk to a friend. Ask him for his wisdom, his insight, his guidance on any area of your life that you're struggling with, and he will give it to you. In the book of James 1:5 said he gives knowledge and advice to those who seek and ask him. You can go to the Lord God and he will give you that advice, that knowledge that you're looking for free. And another Bible scripture I want to share with you is in Proverbs 12:15, and it says, "The way of the fool is right in his own eyes, but a wise man listens to advice." So even in all the things that I've shared with you on this episode about advice, I'm not saying taking advice from people is wrong. I'm saying that getting the right advice from the right people is going to empower and help you in the things that you are trying to do or in your life. So, it's different when you're just going to anybody for advice, because it's not going to work. You have to be deliberate in who you go to for advice and think about how that advice is going to benefit your life. So those are just two Bible scriptures I wanted to share with you there. Proverbs 3, verse 5-6, and also Proverbs 12:15. You can check them out in the NIV Bible and reflect and meditate on them. So the question I have for you this week, when I do the episode notification on Instagram, Twitter and Facebook, if you're not following me over on Insta, it's YEME_empowerment. Over there I share all kinds of things that I'm doing to live an empowered life and quotes and different things to help you live an empowered life. And the question I'm asking you this week is, what good advice have you been given that's helped you in your life? And you can DM me that, you can email me, you can drop it in the comments on Twitter, Facebook or Instagram about, good advice that you've been given. I would love to know. So as I finish this episode, I just want to encourage you again to take away from this episode that advice is good from the right sources and the right people, and to also remember that advice should be a tool to facilitate your empowerment. So that is it for this episode. I hope that you've enjoyed it. Do reach out to me if you've got quotes that you want to share with me on this podcast. Also as well, check out all my resources and services to help you to live an empowered life. All my links are in the show notes description box below, and I will see you on the next episode. Take care.